The Dowager Duchess has not eaten in 11 days, the Duke said. If she refuses another meal, the physicians fear she will not survive the week. Clara Whitmore studied the man standing inside the narrow kitchen of the King's Lantern. His dark greatcoat was wet from the night rain. Mud covered his polished boots, and his silver cravat had been loosened, as though he had tugged at it throughout the journey. Nothing about him resembled the proud Duke of Ravensmere whom villagers described in lowered voices. He looked like a frightened son who had exhausted every respectable solution and ridden into the darkness in search of an impossible one. "Why have you come to me, Your Grace?" Clara asked, wiping flour from her hands. "There must be half a dozen trained cooks at Ravensmere Hall." "There are 9, Sterling Ashcombe answered. "My mother trusts none of them." The bluntness of his reply silenced her. "She refuses everything placed before her: broth, custard, roasted game, even water, unless she sees the pitcher opened. 3 physicians have examined her. One claims grief has unsettled her mind. Another says age has weakened her appetite." Sterling's jaw tightened. "But Mrs. Bell at the mill told me you once fed her husband until he recovered after the surgeon declared there was no hope." "I cooked for him," Clara corrected. "I did not cure him. You persuaded him to eat when no one else could. I allowed him to see what went into his meals. He feared the medicine more than the fever." Something changed in Sterling's expression. It was small, but Clara noticed it, the sudden attention of a man hearing a familiar bell from far away. "My mother says the food at Ravensmere tastes wrong," he said. "We believed it was another symptom of her illness." Clara glanced toward the dying fire. Her mother had taught her that refusal was rarely stubbornness, without reason. A hungry child might reject a bowl because it was too hot. A wounded soldier might refuse meat because the smell recalled a battlefield. People protected themselves long before they found the words to explain what frightened them. "Give me 1 hour," she said. "I'll need my basket and the copper stove." The journey to Ravensmere Hall lasted nearly 2 hours. Clara sat opposite the Duke in a carriage grander than any room she had ever slept in, holding her basket firmly whenever the wheels struck a rut. Sterling spoke little. Once, she caught him staring through the rain-streaked window, with his hand closed around a silver watch he never opened. The great house appeared beyond a line of black yew trees, its pale stone walls rising above the surrounding fields. Dozens of windows glimmered against the darkness, but the manor did not look welcoming. It looked watchful. A footman met them beneath the portico and frowned at Clara's plain brown dress. "This way," Sterling ordered before the servant could question her. They climbed the main staircase and passed portraits of severe Ashcombe ancestors. At the end of the upper gallery, 2 physicians were speaking quietly outside a bedchamber. "Her pulse is weaker," the older physician told Sterling. His gaze moved dismissively over Clara and her basket. "I fear introducing another stranger may agitate her." "She is already dying under your care," Sterling said. "A little agitation can hardly make your success less impressive." The physician colored, but stepped aside. The chamber was oppressively warm. Heavy curtains covered the windows, and the remains of an expensive meal stood untouched on a silver tray. At the center of the enormous bed lay a woman so thin that the embroidered coverlet barely rose with her breathing. Dowager Duchess Honoria Ashcombe opened her eyes as Clara approached. "Another physician?" she asked. Her voice was fragile, but its sharpness remained intact. "Or has my son finally brought an undertaker to measure me?" "She is a cook, mother." "Then remove her more quickly than the physicians." "I have no need of either." Clara did not curtsy or attempt to persuade her. She carried her basket to the small table near the hearth and began unpacking it. A folded copper stove, a twist of dry kindling, barley wrapped in linen, 1 carrot, 2 onions, a piece of mutton bone, and a sealed stone bottle of water drawn from the tavern well. "What are you doing?" Honoria demanded. "Preparing my supper," Clara replied. "In my bedchamber. The kitchens are a considerable distance away, and I have not eaten since midday." Clara lit the stove, placed her small iron pot over the flame, and poured in the water. She washed the barley where Honoria could see it, peeled the vegetables, then held up each ingredient before placing it into the pot. Sterling watched from beside the door. When he moved forward, Clara lifted one hand. "Please remain where you are, Your Grace." His eyebrows rose. Few people had probably spoken to him in that manner, yet he obeyed. As the broth simmered, The plain fragrance of onion, grain, and roasted bone replaced the cloying sweetness of the untouched dishes. Honoria's eyes followed every movement of Clara's knife and spoon. Her suspicion did not disappear, but curiosity gradually began competing with it. Clara tasted the broth first. Then she poured it into a clean earthenware bowl she had brought from the tavern. "Since you have no appetite, my lady, perhaps you will tell me whether I have ruined a perfectly good broth." "I will do no such thing." "Then I must return to the village believing myself a poor cook." Honoria studied her for several seconds. "One taste. Only to correct your vanity." Clara placed the bowl in her hands. The first spoonful touched the old woman's tongue. She waited as though expecting pain. When none came, she swallowed and tried another. The room remained silent while she continued, slowly at first, and then with growing certainty, until her spoon scraped the bottom. Sterling turned his face toward the window, but not before Clara saw the tears in his eyes. Honoria held the empty bowl in both trembling hands. "You let me watch." "Yes, my lady. You did not ask me to trust you. Trust should follow proof. It should never be demanded before it." The Dowager Duchess looked toward her son. Grief entered her expression, joined by something far more troubling. "That is what I have been trying to tell you, Sterling." He stepped closer. "Tell me what?" Before Honoria could answer, the door opened. A tall, silver-haired man, dressed entirely in black, stood upon the threshold. His posture was precise, his face composed, but his gaze went first to the empty bowl and then to Clara's open basket. "The household steward," Sterling said. "Mr. Elias Finch." Finch bowed, though his eyes remained fixed on the ingredients beside Clara's stove. "I came to inquire after her grace," he said. "I see our unexpected visitor has achieved what the physicians could not." There was courtesy in his voice, but no relief. Clara began packing away her knife. Finch moved closer and reached for the small wooden box containing the salt she had brought from home. "You will have no need of this tomorrow," he said. "The Ravensmere pantry is exceptionally well supplied." Clara placed her hand over the box before he could take it. "I prefer my own salt." For one fleeting instant, Finch's fingers trembled. Then his polished smile returned. "As you wish, Miss Whitmore." He withdrew his hand, but the brief movement had already lodged in Clara's mind. A man indifferent to a cook's salt would have laughed at her stubbornness. He would not have looked afraid. Clara glanced from Finch to the untouched silver tray beside the bed. The Dowager Duchess had eaten because she had watched every ingredient enter the pot. Finch had shown no happiness at her recovery, only interest in the supplies that had made it possible. Clara had been summoned to persuade a starving woman to eat. Standing beneath the steward's cold gaze, she understood that Honoria's refusal had never been the illness. It had been her last defense against it. Clara rose before dawn and followed the route a chambermaid had shown her the previous night. The servant stairs twisted through the sleeping house, narrowing as they descended until she reached a passage warmed by the faint breath of banked fires. Beyond it lay the Ravensmere kitchens. The room was nearly as large as the village tavern itself. Black iron ranges lined one wall, copper pans hung from ceiling hooks, and a long preparation table stretched down the center. Two scullery maids were raking ashes from the hearths, while a young kitchen boy carried water from the pump. Their quiet conversation ended the moment Clara entered. She placed her basket upon the table and began measuring barley for Honoria's breakfast. The Dowager Duchess had slept through the night after finishing the broth. Clara had checked on her twice, finding her breathing steadier each time. One meal could not repair months of decline, but it had proven that her body had not forgotten how to accept nourishment. "You are Miss Whitmore." Elias Finch stood in the pantry doorway. In the daylight, he appeared older than Clara had first thought, perhaps 60, although his spine was perfectly straight and his grey hair carefully combed. A ring of keys hung from his belt, each one polished from years of use. "I am. His Grace has instructed that you may prepare the Dowager Duchess's meals until her appetite returns. Naturally, you will work under the established order of this household. I was not informed that the Duke had placed me under your supervision. Everyone who uses this kitchen answers to me in matters of provision." Finch crossed the room and inspected the ingredients she had arranged. His gaze lingered upon her wooden salt box. "Our pantry contains the finest grain, meat, and spices available in the county. Continuing to bring supplies from a village tavern would be both wasteful and insulting to the staff." The Duchess ate because she watched me use ingredients she did not fear. A temporary indulgence. We cannot permit an old woman's nervous imagination to govern an estate. One of the scullery maids lowered her head. Clara noticed the girl's fingers tightening around the handle of her brush. Her imagination kept her alive long enough for me to reach her, Clara said. Finch's expression hardened. You have been inside this house for less than 1 day. Do not mistake a successful bowl of soup for knowledge of the family. Clara opened her salt box and took out a small pinch. Then it should cause no difficulty if I keep using what I know. Finch's hand came down beside hers. The pantry salt has served this household for years. The assertion was too quick. Clara looked directly at him. Has it? Silence spread across the kitchen. Finch withdrew his hand and adjusted the cuff of his coat. You will find Ravensmere less forgiving than a public tavern, Miss Whitmore. People who create unnecessary disorder seldom remain here long. He turned toward the pantry. Clara waited until the door had closed before releasing the breath she had been holding. The older scullery maid glanced nervously after him. She was a thin girl with reddened knuckles and a burn scar across one wrist. What is your name? Clara asked. Nell, miss. Has Mr. Finch always managed the kitchens? All the stores, miss. Kitchen, cellar, stable grain, everything that comes in or goes out. And the cook before me. Nell looked toward the pantry again. Mrs. Weller was dismissed in the autumn. For what reason? She said some of the provisions weren't right. The wine first, and afterward the flour. Mr. Finch accused her of stealing and drinking from the cellar. Was there proof? Nell's face tightened. She tried to show something to her grace. 2 nights later, she fell upon the cellar stairs, broke her hip. Mr. Finch sent her away before she could properly stand. The younger maid crossed herself. Where is she now? No one knows. Her sister lives near York, but Mrs. Weller never wrote to any of us. A pan clattered inside the pantry. Both girls immediately returned to their work. Clara stirred Honoria's porridge while considering what she had heard. A dismissed cook and a frightened duchess did not prove poisoning. Neither did a steward's trembling hand. But they formed a pattern she could not ignore. She prepared the porridge entirely from her own provisions, sweetening it with a spoonful of honey from a sealed jar. When she carried the tray upstairs, Honoria was awake and sitting against the pillows. You have returned, the old woman observed. Did you expect me to flee before breakfast? I expected Finch to arrange it. Clara placed the tray across her lap. He tried. Something resembling satisfaction passed over Honoria's hollow features. She lifted the spoon, examined the porridge, and then looked at Clara. Did anything in this bowl pass through his pantry? No. Honoria began eating. Sterling entered while she was halfway through the bowl. He stopped in the doorway, visibly startled to see his mother feeding herself. Good morning, she said. You need not stare as though witnessing a resurrection. I have not seen you eat breakfast since spring. You have not seen me eat breakfast because you continued allowing Finch to control what was brought to me. Sterling's relief faded beneath frustration. Mother, we have discussed this. Finch has served our family since before I was born, and that makes him incapable of wrongdoing. It makes an accusation against him a serious matter. I am not asking you to hang him in the courtyard. I am asking you to examine the food. The physicians examined everything. The physicians tasted what Finch selected for them. Clara watched Sterling's face. He loved his mother. That much was unmistakable. But he also clung to the stability Finch represented. The steward had probably managed Ravensmere during Sterling's childhood, his father's final illness, and the young duke's first uncertain years in authority. Doubting Finch meant questioning 2 decades of decisions. I will speak with him, Sterling said. No, Clara interrupted. Both mother and son turned toward her. If Mr. Finch has done nothing wrong, questioning him will merely offend him. If he has done something wrong, it will warn him. Sterling's gaze sharpened. You believe my steward is poisoning my mother. I believe the Duchess is afraid of food that passes through his hands. I believe the previous cook questioned the provisions and suffered a convenient accident. And I know, Mr. Finch was more concerned with my salt than with the fact that your mother ate for the first time in 11 days. That is suspicion, not proof. Then allow me to find proof before you confront him. Sterling walked to the window. For several moments, he said nothing. You may continue purchasing your own ingredients, he decided. The expense will be charged to my private account. But you will not accuse Finch before the servants. enter locked rooms, or interfere with estate business. And if I discover something dangerous, you come directly to me. Honoria gave a dry laugh. So, you may ask Finch whether it is true. Sterling flinched. So I may act with evidence rather than fear. Clara accepted his conditions because they gave her what she needed most: time and freedom to keep Honoria away from the pantry supplies. After the Duchess finished eating, Clara returned downstairs and requested a carriage to the village market. She bought barley from a farmer she had known since childhood, vegetables still marked with garden soil, fresh meat from the butcher, and a block of clean sea salt from the grocer who supplied her tavern. At the far end of the square stood a merchant she did not recognize. His cart bore a painted sign announcing that he supplied preserving and table salt to the county's finest estates, including Ravensmere Hall. Best northern salt, he called as she approached. The same quality served at his Grace's own table. Clara took a few grains from the open sack and rubbed them between her fingers. The crystals looked ordinary, but when she lifted them toward her face, she detected a faint bitterness beneath the mineral scent. It reminded her of the apothecary's shop. "Who supplies this to you?" she asked. The merchant's smile diminished. "A northern concern. How long have you sold it to Ravensmere?" 6 months, perhaps. Mr. Finch has never complained. 6 months. Honoria's appetite had begun failing during the same period. Clara returned the salt to the sack. "I will use another merchant." She had taken no more than 20 steps when an uneasy sensation made her glance toward the old market cross. A young man, in a plain traveling coat, was watching her. Beneath the coat, she recognized the dark green trim of Ravensmere livery. She had seen him outside the pantry that morning. Clara continued toward the carriage, without revealing that she had noticed him. Once inside, she watched through the rear window as the servant hurried to the salt merchant. The two men spoke in low voices. Then the merchant looked toward her departing carriage and nodded. Clara closed her hand around the clean block of salt in her basket. She had gone to the market searching for proof that something was wrong with Ravensmere's provisions. Instead, she had discovered that someone was following her and that Finch already considered her questions dangerous. The carriage had barely passed through Ravensmere's gates when Clara made her next decision. Avoiding Finch's pantry would protect Honoria for the moment, but it would not explain what had been happening inside the house for the past 6 months. If the salt merchant was cooperating with the steward, then Finch would soon know that Clara had noticed the strange odor. Whatever evidence remained might disappear before nightfall. She carried her purchases directly to the stillroom instead of the main kitchen. It was a narrow chamber used for drying herbs and preparing household remedies, with a small hearth, a stone sink, and a door Clara could lock from the inside. Nell helped her bring in 2 covered jars and promised to say nothing about where the ingredients were being kept. "Has Mr. Finch ever asked you to carry provisions to the Dowager Duchess?" Clara asked. "Only wine, miss. A servant usually takes up the meals, but Mr. Finch always poured her Grace's wine himself." "Did she drink it?" "Not after she began feeling ill. She said it tasted like old coins." Clara thought of the medicinal bitterness she had detected in the market salt. "Where are those bottles kept?" "In the south cellar. 6 casks arrived sometime in spring. Mr. Finch marked them for her Grace's private use." Before Clara could ask more, footsteps sounded outside. Nell immediately seized a cloth and began wiping an already clean shelf. Finch entered without knocking. "I am told you visited the market again. I require fresh provisions. You also questioned one of my merchants. The salt smelled unusual. To an untrained village palate, perhaps." Clara turned toward him. "My palate has fed half the village for 12 years. It has never required a title to know when salt smells like medicine." Finch's eyes became cold. "His Grace may find your impertinence entertaining while his mother is recovering. Do not assume that indulgence will last." "I assume nothing, Mr. Finch. That is why I inspect what I cook." He glanced at the covered jars, the vegetables, and the block of clean salt. Clara could almost see him calculating how much she knew. "The Dowager Duchess's condition has distressed the entire household," he said. "You should be careful not to worsen that distress by inventing dangers where none exist. Then we are fortunate that an examination will prove me mistaken." For a fraction of a second, Finch's composure faltered. He turned away before Clara could study the reaction more closely. "His Grace requires you in his study." Sterling stood behind his desk when Clara entered, A household ledger opened before him. Finch had reached him first. The Duke's earlier relief had been replaced by the controlled severity of a man who believed his authority was being tested. Mr. Finch informs me that you rejected a merchant who has supplied this estate for half a year and publicly suggested his salt was contaminated. I asked where it came from and said it smelled strange. You have also charged new provisions to my account while the pantry remains full. That was the arrangement we made this morning. The arrangement was intended to calm my mother, not permit you to alarm every merchant in the county. Clara set her basket upon the desk. She had expected Finch to accuse her of waste, so she had prepared before leaving the stillroom. I would rather show you than argue. She removed 2 paper twists and placed them beside a shallow bowl of warm water. The first contained salt Nell had quietly taken from the pantry. The second held grains shaved from Clara's clean block. She emptied each sample into a separate glass. The clean salt dissolved quickly, leaving the water clear. The pantry salt clouded the second glass. A pale residue settled at the bottom, while a faint grey film gathered upon the surface. Sterling leaned closer. That may be dust or poor storage. It may be, Clara agreed. Smell it. He lifted the glass. His expression changed as the bitter medicinal odor reached him. What do you believe it is? I do not know. That is why I have made no accusation. But I will not serve it to your mother. Sterling rang for a footman and ordered both samples sealed. They will be delivered to Mr. Partridge, the apothecary in Belford. He is to examine them without being told where either came from. That is sensible. I am capable of acting sensibly despite my loyalty to an old servant. Miss Whitmore. Clara heard the rebuke, but did not retreat. Then allow the answer to decide the matter. Sterling's gaze rested upon her for several seconds. Until we receive it, no one is to use pantry salt in my mother's food. And the wine? What about it? Her Grace said it tasted like metal. Mr. Finch reserved 6 casks for her private table. A knock interrupted them. Finch entered carrying a stack of correspondence. Sterling closed his hand around the sealed samples before the steward could see them. Clara recognized the choice he had been given: reveal their suspicions and demand an explanation, or remain silent long enough to learn the truth. These require your signature, Your Grace, Finch said. Leave them. The steward placed the papers upon the desk. His gaze moved to Clara, then to the 2 glasses of water. A cook's demonstration, he asked. A disagreement regarding the proper salting of broth, Sterling replied. Nothing that concerns estate business. Finch smiled faintly. Of course. He bowed and departed. But Clara did not believe the deception had succeeded. A man who had controlled every provision entering Ravensmere for 20 years would not dismiss 2 glasses and a sealed package as a culinary disagreement. That evening, Honoria ate roasted chicken, soft carrots, and a small portion of bread Clara had prepared in the bedchamber hearth. Colour was beginning to return to her face, although her hands still trembled with weakness. When did you first believe the food was harming you? Clara asked. Honoria lowered her fork. Last spring, I would feel sick after supper, pain in my stomach, burning in my throat, dizziness so severe I could not stand. Finch blamed the cook. The cook blamed the wine. Sterling blamed grief. My father died that winter, Sterling said from the other side of the room. Mother had scarcely slept for months. I was grieving, not witless. I know that now. Do you? Honoria's voice remained quiet, which made the question more painful. When I asked you to remove Finch from control of my meals, you told me I was humiliating a faithful servant. When I refused his wine, you allowed the physician to call it female hysteria. Sterling looked toward the fire. I thought I was protecting you from your own fear. You were protecting yourself from the discomfort of believing me. Clara continued clearing the tray. The quarrel was not hers, yet its significance could not be ignored. Finch's scheme had survived because Sterling found an old servant's betrayal harder to accept than his mother's suffering. Even if another man had placed poison in the food, the Duke's refusal to investigate had granted him time to continue. Honoria reached for Clara's wrist. There is something in my escritoire. Inside the little writing desk, beneath several bundles of letters, Clara found a folded page covered with columns of figures. I began reviewing the estate accounts after my husband died, Honoria explained. Timber profits had fallen for 3 consecutive years, yet the eastern woods had been heavily cut. Finch said repairs, and tenant improvements consumed the difference. I asked for the original receipts. And did he provide them? He promised to bring them after Easter. Before Easter arrived, I became ill. Clara placed the page in Sterling's hands. It contained dates, expected timber sales, and amounts received. Nearly £3,000 were unaccounted for. Sterling's face drained of colour. Why did you never show me this? I tried. You returned it unopened and said Finch had already explained the matter. He remembered. Clara saw it in the sudden shame that passed across his features. Honoria leaned back against the pillows. Someone did not merely wish to make me sick. Someone needed me unable to examine these accounts. Sterling folded the page carefully. I will review every ledger tonight. No, Clara said. If Finch notices records being removed, he may destroy what remains. Sterling looked at her. Then what do you suggest? Let him believe you are still defending him. Honoria's mouth curved with grim approval. The girl understands deception better than either of us. I prefer cooking, Clara replied. But both require knowing when something has been deliberately concealed beneath too much sweetness. Sterling agreed to examine only the ledgers already kept in his private study. Clara would continue caring for Honoria and quietly note which provisions Finch attempted to control. Neither would enter the steward's office until the apothecary returned his findings. The arrangement lasted less than 24 hours. Shortly before dawn, Clara awoke to the smell of smoke. She ran into the passage and found a thin, grey cloud crawling beneath the still-room door. Someone had pushed burning rags through the lower ventilation opening. The herbs hanging from the rafters were beginning to catch, and flames had reached the shelf where she stored Honoria's ingredients. Clara seized a water pitcher and threw it across the fire. Nell arrived with 2 kitchen boys, and together they smothered the flames beneath wet cloths before they could spread into the walls. The clean salt was ruined. The barley sacks had been soaked, and 1 jar of honey had shattered upon the floor. Nothing else in the kitchen wing had burned. Finch appeared after the danger had passed, fully dressed despite the early hour. A spark from the hearth, no doubt, he said. The hearth was cold, Clara replied. Then a candle left unattended. I extinguished every candle myself. Finch looked at the blackened ventilation opening. Accidents occur in unfamiliar houses. Clara knelt beside the burned rags. Something hard was caught inside one fold, a small brass button bearing the crest used on the coats of Ravensmere's senior footman. It could identify the person who had carried the rags, but not the man who had ordered him. Clara closed her fingers around it before Finch noticed. Sterling arrived moments later, pulling on his coat. When he saw the damage, anger replaced the last traces of sleep. No one enters this room until I have questioned the night servants. That will create unnecessary panic, Finch warned. The household has already endured considerable disruption since Miss Whitmore arrived. Sterling turned slowly toward him. My mother has eaten every meal prepared by Miss Whitmore. Now the room containing those provisions has caught fire while the hearth was cold. I think a little disruption is justified. Finch bowed. As you command. He walked away with measured steps. Clara waited until he had disappeared before showing Sterling the button. This belongs to Thomas Reed, he said, one of Finch's personal footmen, the same man who followed me through the market. Sterling's jaw hardened. I will have him brought here. They found Thomas in the stable yard, attempting to saddle a horse. When 2 guards blocked his path, the young man surrendered without resistance. His coat was missing a button, and soot darkened the edge of his right sleeve. I did not mean to harm anyone, he stammered. Mr. Finch said the village woman had brought spoiled food into the house. He told me to burn it before her grace was made worse. Did he order you to set fire to the room? Sterling demanded. He said to destroy everything she had purchased. I thought the stone floor would prevent the flames from spreading. Why were you following her at the market? To learn where she bought her provisions and whom she questioned. Sterling's expression became dangerously still. Where is Finch now? Thomas glanced toward the manor. He went to the south cellar, Your Grace. He took 2 men and ordered a cart brought round. Clara and Sterling reached the cellar entrance as the first cask was being rolled into the service yard. Finch stood beside the cart, directing the labourers with his usual composure. What is the meaning of this? Sterling asked. Finch did not startle. Several wine casks have spoiled. I am having them disposed of before they contaminate the rest of the cellar. The 6 reserved for my mother. A pause followed. As it happens. Yes. Sterling stepped between the labourers and the cart. Put the cask down. Finch's eyes shifted toward Clara. Your Grace, spoiled wine is of no value. Then you will not object to our examining it. The casks are estate property under my management. They are my property under my authority. For the first time, open hostility appeared in Finch's face. You would humiliate a servant who has protected this family for 20 years because a tavern cook found cloudy water in a glass. Sterling could have withdrawn. Clara saw how deeply Finch expected loyalty, habit, and pride to influence him. For years, the steward had used those forces to make every question feel like an insult. Instead, the Duke ordered the labourers to remove the cask's wooden bung. The smell that escaped was sweeter than ordinary wine, but beneath it lay the same metallic bitterness Clara had detected in the salt. She dipped a clean silver spoon into the liquid. Within moments, the polished surface began to darken. Sterling stared at it. Finch did not. That absence of surprise condemned him more powerfully than fear would have done. A horse entered the yard at speed before Sterling could speak. The rider was the footman sent to Belford, his face pale from the cold and hard journey. He dismounted with a sealed letter in his hand. From Mr. Partridge, Your Grace. He said it could not wait. Sterling broke the seal and read. His eyes moved once over the message and then returned to the beginning, as though he hoped the words might change. What did he find? Clara asked. The Duke raised his gaze to Finch. The pantry salt contains arsenic. One of the labourers recoiled from the cask. Thomas began whispering a prayer. Finch remained motionless for several seconds. Then he lowered his eyes with the practiced sorrow of a loyal servant confronted by disaster. Your Grace, this is far worse than I feared. You feared it. I suspected the merchant might be dishonest. That is why I ordered the casks removed. You ordered Clara's provisions burned before you attempted to remove the wine, to protect your mother, by destroying the only food she has been able to eat. Finch finally looked directly at Sterling. I have spent my life protecting Ravensmere. If poison entered this house, then someone has used my authority without my knowledge. The explanation was prepared, reasonable, and difficult to disprove. Finch had not purchased the salt publicly with his own hands. Servants carried his orders, merchants delivered his provisions, and clerks recorded the payments. He had placed distance between himself and every dangerous object. Sterling ordered the steward confined to his rooms while the accounts and cellars were searched. Finch surrendered his keys without protest. As a guard escorted him away, he passed close to Clara. You should have remained at your tavern, he murmured. Clara met his gaze. And you should have chosen a poison without a smell. His mouth tightened, but he continued walking. The search began at once. In the south cellar, they found all 6 casks bearing a small black mark beneath the rim, distinguishing them from the wine served to the rest of the household. In Finch's office, however, there were no letters from the salt merchant, no bottles of arsenic, and no record of instructions given to Thomas. The pantry accounts showed only ordinary purchases. Every entry appeared proper. He knew we were suspicious, Sterling said. He has removed the evidence. Not all of it, Clara replied. She pointed to the invoice for the 6 wine casks. The merchant's name was genuine, and the price was ordinary. But Sterling's written approval appeared at the bottom. I never signed this. The signature looked convincing, until Clara laid it beside the note Sterling had sent to her tavern. The letters were carefully imitated, but the angle of the final stroke was wrong. He forged your name, she said. Sterling's anger gave way to something heavier. With my signature, he could order anything from any merchant in the county and charge it to Ravensmere. Honoria's missing money, the poisoned salt, the reserved wine, and the burned stillroom now formed parts of the same design, yet they still needed proof of who had supplied the arsenic and why Finch had risked murdering the woman who had trusted him for 20 years. Clara examined the forged invoice again. A faint number had been written in the upper corner, 47. B. It was not the number of a wine order. She had seen marks like it whenever the village apothecary prepared restricted medicines. The first number identified the page in his controlled substance ledger. The letter recorded the purchaser. If Mr. Partridge uses the same accounting system as other apothecaries, Clara said, this may lead us to the original order. Sterling reached for his coat. Then we ride to Belford now. A crash sounded from the courtyard below. Clara hurried to the window. The footman who had delivered the apothecary's letter lay motionless beside the mounting block. His horse had bolted, and one stirrup hung unnaturally loose from the saddle. Nell ran into the office, breathless. "Miss Whitmore, you must come quickly. Mr. Finch is gone." Sterling spun toward her. "Gone?" The guard outside his room was struck from behind. "The window is open, and one of the stable horses is missing." Clara looked again at the fallen messenger. Finch had not merely escaped confinement. He had prevented the one man who knew where the Duke intended to search next from speaking, and he was already riding toward Belford. If the apothecary's ledger contained the proof they needed, Finch meant to reach it first. Sterling reached the stable yard before the grooms had finished lifting the injured messenger from the ground. The man was breathing, but blood darkened his hair above the left temple. Clara knelt beside him and found no broken bone beneath his coat. The loose stirrup had not caused the fall. A deep cut ran through the leather strap, leaving only a thin section to break once the horse gathered speed. "This was done with a knife," she said. Sterling looked toward the empty stall at the end of the stable. "Which horse did Finch take?" "Blackthorn, Your Grace," the head groom answered. "The fastest gelding in the north stable. Have 2 others saddled." Clara rose. "I am coming." "No, I recognize the notation upon the invoice. You may need me to locate the corresponding entry. You will remain here with my mother. Finch has poisoned her for 6 months. If he reaches Belford before us, the apothecary may become his next victim." Sterling looked as though he meant to argue, then abandoned the effort. "Can you ride?" "My father kept 3 delivery horses. I can remain in a saddle." Minutes later, they left Ravensmere with 2 estate guards behind them. Finch possessed a considerable lead, but the eastern road had been softened by the previous night's rain. Blackthorn's hoofprints appeared clearly wherever the track narrowed between the hedges. At the second milestone, those prints turned toward a wooded lane leading south. "He is avoiding the village road," one guard said. "He knows we will follow him," Sterling replied. "He may intend to approach Belford from the old quarry path." Clara studied the ground. Blackthorn's tracks continued down the lane, but something troubled her. The hoofprints were deep and evenly spaced, appropriate for a horse ridden at speed, yet no mud had been thrown against the adjacent hedge. "He is not on that horse," she said. Sterling reined in. "What?" Someone led Blackthorn down this lane. A galloping horse would scatter mud across those leaves. The Duke dismounted and examined the tracks. Near the entrance to the lane, 2 sets of human footprints appeared beside the horse. One returned toward the main road, but the churned mud from their own horses had nearly erased it. "He changed horses," Sterling said. "He knew we would recognize Blackthorn's shoes." A cart approached from the direction of Ravensmere, driven by a farmer carrying empty milk churns. Sterling stopped him and described Finch. "I saw a gentleman in a dark cloak perhaps 20 minutes ago," the farmer said. "His horse had gone lame. A man with a grey mare allowed him to exchange mounts for money. He rode toward Belford. The pursuit continued. They reached the town shortly before noon and found Mr. Partridge's apothecary shop closed despite the hour. A wooden sign swung above the door, and one of the front windows had been broken. Sterling tried the handle. It was locked. Clara led them through the alley to the rear yard. The back door stood slightly open. Inside, shelves had been overturned, and glass jars lay shattered across the floor. The sharp, mingled odors of vinegar, spirits, and dried herbs filled the air. "Mr. Partridge?" Clara called. A faint groan came from behind the counter. The apothecary lay bound at the wrists, a cloth tied across his mouth. A bruise was forming along his cheek, but he remained conscious. Sterling cut the bindings, while Clara brought water. "Finch," Partridge gasped. "He demanded my controlled substance ledger." "Did he take it?" Sterling asked. "The book upon the desk was a duplicate. I keep the original below the floor, whenever an order bears a nobleman's seal." He pointed toward a loose board beside the weighing table. Sterling lifted it and removed a narrow leather volume wrapped in oilcloth. "Entry 47, Clara said, possibly marked with the letter B. Partridge turned the pages. Entry 47B recorded 6 separate purchases of white arsenic over 6 months. The substance had supposedly been ordered to kill rats in Ravensmere's grain stores. Each purchase bore Sterling's copied signature and a wax impression of his ducal seal. "I never authorized these," Sterling said. "I believed the orders unusual," Partridge replied. "But Mr. Finch collected them personally and carried letters bearing your signature. Can you swear to that before a magistrate?" "I can. I also retained one of the letters because the quantity troubled me." From a locked metal box beneath the floor, Partridge produced a folded document. Finch's handwriting appeared throughout the order, while Sterling's name had been forged at the bottom. More importantly, the paper carried a faint watermark used by Ravensmere's estate office. "He wrote this inside my house with paper purchased for my business," Sterling said. "It proves access," Clara replied, "but he will claim someone else wrote it." Partridge pointed to a dark smudge beside the signature. "I required him to place his thumb against the entry when he collected the final order. It is my custom with controlled poisons." Finch's print could not be examined with modern precision, but the mark and Partridge's testimony placed him inside the shop, accepting the arsenic. Combined with the forged letter, it would be difficult to explain. "Where did Finch go?" Sterling asked. "He searched the shelves, struck me when I refused to surrender the ledger, and fled through the front door." The guards separated to search the streets and question the tollkeeper. Sterling remained with Partridge while Clara examined the damage. A few pages had been torn from the duplicate ledger before Finch abandoned it. The missing entries covered purchases made not by Ravensmere, but by a timber company operating near the estate's eastern woods. Clara remembered Honoria's figures, showing money missing from timber sales. "Did Finch ever purchase medicines under another name?" she asked. Partridge adjusted his spectacles. "He sometimes used the name Frederick Nash when ordering treatments for labourers. He said the man was a foreman. Do you know him?" "I have never met him." Sterling turned from the window. "There is no Frederick Nash employed anywhere upon my estate." Clara searched the original ledger. Several payments attributed to Nash had been made in the same month that Finch purchased arsenic. The quantities were harmless medicines, liniment, fever, powder, and bandages, but each charge created a written record, implying that a separate man was conducting business near the timberlands. "He invented a foreman," Clara said. "Perhaps he also invented the company purchasing your timber." Sterling examined the entries. "If Finch sold estate timber through a false company, he could report a lower price in my accounts and keep the difference. Your mother discovered the missing money. That gave him a reason to silence her." A guard returned with news that Finch had been seen riding north, away from Ravensmere and the eastern road. The grey mare had later been found outside a coaching inn. From there, he could have taken a post-chaise toward London, York, or the coast. Sterling ordered the magistrate notified and descriptions sent to every tollgate in the county. Then he arranged for 2 men to remain with Partridge until the shop could be secured. During the return journey, his anger gradually gave way to silence. "My mother asked me to inspect the accounts," he said at last. "I returned her notes unopened. You trusted the man who had served your family." "I chose to trust him because it was convenient. There is a difference." Clara did not offer comfort he had not earned. "If I had listened, she might never have suffered." "No," Clara said. "Finch chose to poison her. That crime is his. But every time you refused to investigate, you gave him another opportunity." Sterling accepted the words without defense. "You speak to me as though I were an ordinary man. In matters of truth, Your Grace, you are." They returned to Ravensmere near dusk. Honoria was seated beside the fire, rather than confined to bed. Nell had prepared bread and warm milk from Clara's supplies, and the old woman had consumed both. Sterling placed the apothecary's letter and ledger entry upon the table before her. "Finch purchased arsenic using my forged signature," he said. "He also created the identity of a false timber foreman." Honoria read the documents. "Then the hidden accounts must still be somewhere in this house. We searched his office." "You searched where he expected a duke to search." Sterling frowned. "Where would you look?" "In the room where he felt most powerful." The answer led them back to the main pantry. For 20 years, Finch had controlled the stores from a tall desk positioned near its only window. The drawers contained nothing suspicious, and the shelves held ordinary household inventories. Clara examined the room as she would inspect a kitchen, after discovering that food had been stolen. A thief could hide one missing loaf by moving the others forward, but the dust and wear of daily use often betrayed what had changed. The stone floor beneath the desk was evenly marked. The wall behind it was not. One section of wood paneling bore a narrow vertical line where years of dust had failed to settle. "There is a door here," she said. Sterling pushed against the panel. It did not move. Honoria inspected Finch's ring of keys, which had been recovered from the guard outside his room. One key was smaller than the others and had no label. The concealed panel opened onto a narrow staircase, descending between the pantry wall and the wine cellar. At the bottom stood a locked chamber, scarcely wide enough for two people. Inside were shelves of account books, sealed coin bags, and bundles of correspondence. One chest contained silver bearing the Ravensmere crest. Another held nearly £800 in banknotes. On the upper shelf lay a black ledger written entirely in Finch's hand. Sterling opened it upon a small table. The entries went back 11 years. Each legitimate timber sale appeared beside a second figure, showing the true amount received. The difference had been diverted through companies controlled by fictitious merchants. Payments were recorded to clerks, carriers, and foremen who did not exist. Honoria added the columns with a trembling finger. More than £3,000. "The money does not explain all of this," Clara said. "He could have fled as soon as you requested the accounts." "He believed the theft was protected by my father's trust," Sterling answered. "When Mother began an independent review, she became the only person capable of recognizing how long it had continued." A bundle of letters tied with black ribbon rested beneath the ledger. Most were orders to merchants, but the final envelope carried Honoria's name. She opened it. The letter had never been delivered. It was a copy of the instructions she had sent to a London auditor shortly before her illness began, requesting a complete examination of Ravensmere's timber revenues. Beneath it, Finch had written a single sentence: "The review must not begin before winter." Clara looked at the dates. Honoria's first severe illness had occurred 4 days after the letter was intercepted. "He did not intend merely to frighten you," she said. "He planned to keep you weak until the auditor abandoned the journey. And when I refused to die quickly enough," Honoria replied, "he increased the poison." Sterling rested both hands against the table. The hidden chamber contained proof of theft, forgery, and motive, yet Finch remained beyond their reach. A folded map slipped from the back of the ledger. Several roads had been marked in red, leading from Ravensmere's eastern woods toward private docks upon the coast. Beside one dock was written a date 3 days from now. "What leaves from there?" Clara asked. "Timber vessels bound for the Netherlands," Sterling answered. "If Finch has passage arranged, he will try to reach the coast before the magistrate's notices do." Honoria studied the map, not without collecting the remainder of his money. They searched the coin bags and compared them with the ledger. Most of Finch's stolen wealth was missing. A notation beside the final timber company referred to a payment stored at Eastmere Lodge, an abandoned hunting house on the northern edge of the estate. "He will return for it," Sterling said. "Then we must make him believe the lodge has not been discovered," Clara replied. Sterling sent no guards openly toward Eastmere. Instead, he ordered trusted tenants to watch the surrounding lanes, while 2 constables concealed themselves inside the lodge. The public story spread through the servants' hall that Finch had escaped with all his money and was already halfway to London. For the first time since entering Ravensmere, Clara allowed herself to believe they were ahead of him. That belief ended shortly after midnight. She awakened to find her chamber door open. A note lay upon the floor, folded around the brass button she had taken from the burned rags. "Come to the old ice house alone, or the girl who helped you will never leave it." Clara ran to Nell's room. The bed was empty, its blanket thrown aside. A broken cup lay beside the washstand, and the window had been forced open. Finch had not fled toward the coast. He had hidden close enough to watch the house, learned who had helped Clara, and taken the one servant whose testimony could connect him to the poisoned provisions and the still-room fire. Clara carried the note to Sterling's chamber. He read it once and immediately reached for the bell. "If we summon the guards, he may harm her," Clara warned. "You cannot go alone. He expects me. If no one appears, Nell may die before we find the entrance." Sterling took a pistol from the drawer beside his bed. "Then he will see you arrive alone. He will not see me following." The old ice house stood beyond the kitchen garden, half buried beneath an artificial hill. Its heavy wooden door was open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Clara entered, carrying one lantern. The cold sharpened as she moved downward. and the air smelled of wet stone and decaying straw. Nell, a muffled cry came from below. At the bottom of the stairs, Clara found the maid tied to a chair. Finch stood behind her with one hand resting upon her shoulder and a narrow knife held against the rope near her throat. His black coat was stained with mud, but his voice remained controlled. "You have caused considerable inconvenience, Miss Whitmore. Let her go. She knows nothing about your accounts. She knows I ordered Thomas to follow you. She knows which casks were reserved for her grace. More importantly, she is useful because you possess the tiresome habit of protecting people beneath your station." Clara placed the lantern upon the floor. "What do you want?" "The apothecary's original ledger and the black book you found behind my pantry. They are already with the magistrate. If that were true, the roads would be filled with constables. Instead, His Grace has hidden the discovery and set watchers around Eastmere Lodge. He had learned about the trap. Someone inside Ravensmere was still reporting to him. "You cannot recover everything," Clara said. "Mr. Partridge will testify. Thomas will testify. The Duke has seen your forged accounts. Servants retract statements. Tradesmen forget details. Dukes avoid scandals that expose their own incompetence." A faint movement appeared in the darkness behind the staircase. Sterling had reached the lower passage, but Finch had positioned himself where one clear shot might strike Nell. Clara needed to draw him away from the girl. "You poisoned Lady Honoria because she found your theft," she said. "But you made a mistake. The contaminated salt. No, you assumed a wealthy woman would always demand rich food. She survived because hunger taught her to distrust it." Finch's expression tightened. "She survived because you interfered. She survived because you never understood kitchens. Arsenic in wine leaves a metallic taste. Arsenic mixed badly with coarse salt settles in warm water. You controlled every ledger and servant, yet a bowl of barley defeated you." Anger cracked his composure. He stepped around the chair. "You are an ignorant tavern woman who happened upon evidence she did not comprehend. And you are a thief who needed 20 years to steal what an honest man might earn in 10. Finch moved toward her with the knife raised. Sterling emerged from the darkness. "Drop it." Finch spun and caught Clara by the arm, dragging her against him. The knife pressed beneath her jaw. Nell screamed through her gag. "Put down the pistol, Your Grace," Finch ordered, "or your remarkable cook will not prepare another meal." Sterling's hand remained steady, but he could not fire without risking Clara. Footsteps sounded above. The constables had followed, but they were too far away. Finch began backing toward a second passage, leading to the icehouse's outer loading hatch. Clara felt the blade move against her skin. On the floor beside her stood the lantern, its metal handle growing hot above the flame. She kicked it. The lantern struck Finch's shin and burst open. Burning oil spread across the damp straw at his feet. He released Clara instinctively and stepped backward. Sterling crossed the distance before Finch could recover. He seized the steward's wrist and struck it against the stone wall until the knife fell. The two men struggled near the flames, but the constables reached them moments later and forced Finch to the floor. Clara smothered the burning straw with her cloak, then hurried to Nell. The maid was terrified, but uninjured. When the constables pulled Finch upright, the steward's composure had vanished. He looked at Sterling with hatred stripped of every trace of loyalty. "Your mother would have died peacefully," he said. "The accounts would have balanced, and Ravensmere would have continued exactly as it always had." Sterling's face became cold. "It continued because women such as my mother and Clara repaired what men like you corrupted." Finch laughed bitterly. "And will you announce that to the county? Will you tell them a duke ignored his own mother until a tavern cook exposed the truth beneath his roof?" "Yes," Sterling said. "Every word." The answer silenced Finch, but Clara knew an arrest inside a dark icehouse would not be enough. Honoria had been called unstable before physicians and servants. Clara had been accused of waste and disorder. Finch had governed Ravensmere through fear for 20 years, and those harmed by him deserved to see his authority broken openly. The truth would have to be spoken where the lies had been allowed to stand. At dawn, Sterling ordered the entire household summoned to the grand entrance hall. The servants gathered beneath the unlit chandelier as the first grey light entered through the high windows. Footmen stood beside chambermaids, still dressed in plain morning gowns. Stable hands remained near the doors with mud upon their boots. and the kitchen staff clustered together at the edge of the marble floor. Some looked frightened, while others seemed unable to believe the man who had governed every corner of Ravensmere for 2 decades would soon be brought before them under guard. Clara stood beside Nell near the foot of the staircase. A thin cut marked the place where Finch's knife had touched her throat, but she had refused Sterling's order to remain upstairs. Finch had tried to silence her because of what she knew. She intended to stand where he could see that he had failed. Thomas Reed waited between 2 constables. His soot-stained coat and missing brass button had been placed upon a table, along with the forged arsenic order, samples of the contaminated salt, the black ledger, and the records discovered inside Finch's hidden chamber. Sterling descended from the gallery with Honoria upon his arm. The servants parted as the Dowager Duchess crossed the hall. Only 12 days earlier, she had lain in bed too weak to lift a spoon. Now she wore a dark blue gown, her grey hair arranged beneath a lace cap. She moved slowly, but without assistance, once they reached the final step. A murmur passed through the household. Finch entered between 2 constables. His black coat was torn from the struggle in the ice house, and dried mud stained one knee. Yet he raised his head, as though he were the wronged gentleman, rather than a prisoner. "Is this spectacle necessary?" he asked. "Private estate matters should not be performed before servants." Honoria regarded him steadily. "You relied upon their silence, while you frightened and exploited them. They will hear the truth." "What truth would that be?" "The conclusions of a village cook and a sick woman." Sterling's face tightened, but Honoria lifted one hand before he could answer. "The truth," she said, "that I was not wasting away from grief, weak nerves, or an old woman's imagination. I was being poisoned through provisions purchased and controlled under your authority." Finch glanced toward the evidence table. "If arsenic was found in the pantry, then a merchant deceived the household. I cannot personally inspect every grain delivered to Ravensmere." "You inspected Clara's salt quickly enough," Nell said. Her voice was quiet. Finch turned toward her. For an instant, the maid looked as frightened as she had inside the ice house. Then Clara took her hand. Nell continued. "You ordered that nothing Miss Whitmore brought into the house be permitted near her grace. You told Thomas to follow her to the market. When that did not stop her, you told him to burn the stillroom supplies." Thomas lowered his head. "It is true." Finch's expression remained dismissive. "A frightened footman will say anything to avoid punishment." Sterling placed the brass button beside Thomas's damaged coat. "He has admitted his part. The physical evidence supports him. It proves he set a fire. It does not prove I ordered it. The note used to lure Clara to the ice house was written in your hand," Sterling said. "Nell was found bound in your custody, and you held a knife against Clara's throat before 3 constables. That matter may be explained as desperation, after I realized this family intended to make me its scapegoat." Honoria looked almost amused. "You remain remarkably devoted to explanations." A side door opened, and Mr. Partridge entered with the parish magistrate. The apothecary's bruised face showed the result of Finch's visit to Belford. Under his arm, he carried the original controlled substance ledger. Finch's confidence weakened. Partridge testified that Finch had personally collected arsenic on 6 occasions. He displayed the written orders bearing Sterling's forged name and the thumb mark required upon the final collection. The magistrate compared the handwriting with pages from Finch's private ledger. "Similar writing proves nothing," Finch said. "A clerk could have imitated my hand." "It is not merely similar," Clara replied. She approached the table and placed the forged arsenic order beside one of Finch's ordinary purchasing records. When Mr. Finch writes the word grain, he joins the final 2 letters with a narrow upward stroke. He makes the same stroke in the arsenic order. He also places his numbers slightly below the line and presses harder whenever he writes the figure 7. The false signature belongs to the Duke, but the instructions surrounding it were written by Mr. Finch. The magistrate examined both documents. "The habits are consistent." "You are a cook," Finch said contemptuously. "Not a handwriting expert." "No, but cooks spend their lives recognizing small differences that others overlook. A spoonful too much salt, flour stored beside damp stone, meat beginning to spoil beneath heavy spices. You depended upon everyone believing small differences did not matter." Clara uncovered the 2 glasses prepared in Sterling's study. The clean salt had dissolved without residue. The pantry sample remained cloudy, even after standing overnight. This salt came from the stores controlled by Mr. Finch. The same product was sold in the village by a merchant claiming Ravensmere as his principal customer. The merchant has disappeared, Finch said. Perhaps because he is guilty. He has not disappeared, Sterling answered. 2 guards escorted the salt merchant into the hall. His earlier confidence had vanished. He clutched his cap between both hands and avoided Finch's eyes. The tollkeeper had stopped him before dawn after receiving the magistrate's description. In his cart, the guards had found 3 sacks of contaminated salt and a purse containing Ravensmere banknotes. I did not know the old lady would eat it, the merchant blurted. Mr. Finch said the powder was for rats in the cellar. He instructed me to mix only a little into each sack and deliver it under the ordinary account. Finch looked at him with undisguised disgust. You are lying to save your neck. I have your letters. The merchant produced 4 folded pages from inside his coat. Finch had signed none of them, but each was written in the same distinctive hand. One instructed him to increase the quantity placed in the next delivery, because the first mixture was proving ineffective. Silence settled over the foyer. Clara glanced toward Honoria. The old woman remained upright, but the hand resting against her skirt had begun to tremble. Sterling moved closer, without attempting to take control from her. The magistrate read the final letter aloud. The subject continues to resist the evening wine. Future preparation must therefore be divided between the table salt and the flour used for her private bread. Several servants recoiled. Mrs. Archer, the housekeeper, pressed one hand against her mouth. He ordered me to dismiss the baker when she questioned the flour. Mrs. Weller, Clara said. Where was she sent after her fall? The housekeeper's eyes filled with shame. Mr. Finch said her sister had taken her to York. I never saw the carriage leave. Finch's gaze shifted toward the servant passage. Clara recognized that reaction. She never left Ravensmere. Nell gasped. Sterling ordered the guards to search every unused room, outbuilding, and estate cottage. Finch said nothing, but a pulse had begun beating visibly in his temple. The magistrate faced him. Where is Mrs. Weller? I have no knowledge of her whereabouts. You controlled her dismissal. She was injured and unable to continue her duties. Where was she taken? To relatives, I was told. By whom? Finch hesitated. It was the first question he could not answer with a prepared explanation. An elderly stable hand stepped from the crowd. I drove her from the house, Your Grace. Every face turned toward him. Mr. Finch ordered me to take her to the old keeper's cottage, beyond the eastern woods. He said she had stolen from the family and was to remain there until a magistrate could question her. I brought food for 3 weeks. Then, he told me she had confessed and been sent away. Did you see her leave? Sterling asked. No, Your Grace. The eastern cottage had been abandoned since Sterling's father stopped hunting. It stood less than 2 miles from Eastmere Lodge, concealed by woods and rarely visited in winter. 4 mounted men were sent at once. While they searched, the hearing continued. Honoria opened the black ledger and described how she had discovered discrepancies between the timber cut from Ravensmere's eastern woods and the income reported in the estate accounts. The false companies recorded in Finch's book purchased the wood at reduced prices, then sold it at its full value. The difference passed through fictitious foremen and disappeared into private accounts. He stole for 11 years, she said. When I requested an independent audit, he intercepted my letter and began poisoning me 4 days later. Finch gave a humorless smile. A convenient story. The estate prospered under my management. It prospered because my mother detected and corrected your losses, Sterling said. You stole only what you believed she would not notice, and you noticed nothing. The insult struck its mark. Sterling could have hidden behind rank, but he faced the assembled household instead. That is true, he said. I noticed nothing because I refused to look. My mother warned me that her food tasted wrong. She asked me to remove Finch from authority over her meals. I dismissed her fear as grief, because trusting him was easier than questioning the order upon which I had relied. Honoria watched her son in silence. I allowed physicians to call her unstable, he continued. I returned her account notes unopened. When Clara first questioned the pantry, I accused her of waste and disruption. Finch committed these crimes, but my refusal to listen permitted them to continue beneath my roof. Every servant who was threatened, dismissed, or silenced because of him was failed by my judgment. No Duke of Ravensmere had probably spoken such words before household servants. The admission could not restore the months taken from Honoria or erase Mrs. Weller's suffering, but it stripped Finch of his strongest defense. Sterling would not conceal the scandal to protect his own pride. The steward's remaining composure broke. "You weak, sentimental fool," he said. "Do you believe they will respect you for confessing incompetence? Your father understood that an estate requires obedience. He trusted me because I kept disorder from reaching him." "My father is dead," Sterling answered. "My mother nearly joined him because I confused obedience with loyalty." A commotion sounded near the main doors. One of the search riders entered, supporting a woman wrapped in blankets. Mrs. Weller's hair had gone almost entirely white, and she leaned heavily upon a wooden crutch, yet her eyes became clear when she saw Finch. "That is the man who pushed me," she said. The servant stirred, but the magistrate raised a hand for silence. Mrs. Weller explained that she had detected an unfamiliar white powder in the flour reserved for Honoria's bread. When she confronted Finch, he accused her of theft. Later that evening, as she descended to the cellar to collect a sample, someone approached from behind and pushed her down the stone steps. She regained consciousness in the abandoned keeper's cottage. Finch told her that any attempt to return to Ravensmere would result in her arrest and transportation for stealing the Duchess's silver. After the stable hand stopped bringing food, a widowed tenant living beyond the woods found her and kept her hidden, believing Finch still possessed the authority to imprison her. "Why did you not send word to me?" Sterling asked. Mrs. Weller looked at him with painful honesty. "Because everyone knew you believed Mr. Finch, before you believed anyone below him." Sterling had no answer. The magistrate ordered Finch, Thomas, and the salt merchant taken into formal custody. Thomas would be charged for the fire and kidnapping, but permitted to provide evidence regarding Finch's instructions. The merchant would answer for distributing poison. Finch faced charges of attempted murder, forgery, embezzlement, unlawful confinement, assault, and abduction. As the constables prepared to lead him away, Finch turned toward Clara. "You believe you have won, because an old woman ate your soup." "No," Clara said. "You lost because you thought ordinary people would never compare what they saw." He was escorted through the front entrance, under the gaze of every servant he had once commanded. Honoria remained at the foot of the stairs until the doors closed behind him. Only then did her knees weaken. Sterling caught her before she fell, and Clara brought a chair. "I am not dying," Honoria insisted. "No," Clara said, kneeling beside her. "But recovering does not require you to pretend that you were never harmed." The old woman looked at her, then allowed herself to rest. During the following week, Ravensmere changed in ways both visible and quiet. Every pantry provision associated with Finch's merchants was removed and examined. Contaminated grain and flour were destroyed under the magistrate's supervision. The 6 poisoned wine casks were sealed as evidence. Mrs. Weller received the best room in the guest wing and the attention of a surgeon from Belford. Her hip had healed badly, but with proper treatment and a fitted brace, he believed she might walk with less pain. Sterling granted her a lifetime pension and publicly withdrew the accusation of theft recorded against her. Thomas confessed that Finch had controlled him through gambling debts. He admitted following Clara, burning the still-room supplies, helping Finch escape, and taking Nell to the ice house. His cooperation did not erase those acts, but it revealed the names of 2 clerks who had assisted in the false timber transactions. The missing money was traced to accounts in London and a strongbox at Eastmere Lodge. A portion had already been spent, but enough remained to repay the estate workers whose wages Finch had reduced while claiming Ravensmere lacked funds. Honoria recovered more slowly than anyone wished. Some mornings she could eat an entire breakfast. On others, the sight of a covered dish made her hands shake, and Clara returned to preparing meals beside her chair. Sterling attended whenever his duties allowed. He no longer urged his mother to trust the food. He watched Clara open each jar, wash every vegetable, and taste the first spoonful. The ritual taught him that recovery could not be commanded like an estate order. One evening, after Honoria had fallen asleep beside the fire, Sterling followed Clara into the upper gallery. "You have scarcely rested since arriving," he said. "Neither has your mother. My mother sleeps at night. I have seen light beneath the still-room door past 2 in the morning. I am preparing separate stores until the new merchants are approved." You are also reviewing every kitchen inventory and training the servants to test unfamiliar provisions. Someone should. I agree. I only question whether that person must refuse sleep entirely. Clara continued walking. I have spent 12 years feeding miners, laborers, widows, and children whose families could not always pay. Long hours are not new to me. Being threatened with a knife is. She stopped. Sterling's gaze moved to the thin mark upon her throat. I should never have allowed you to enter the ice house. You did not allow me. I chose to go because Nell's life was in danger. And if Finch had killed you, then blaming yourself would not have brought me back. That is not an answer.